Close your eyes for just a second. Now open them. In that instant, your brain performed something extraordinary. It filled in the gap, creating seamless continuity where there was actually a break in your experience. Your consciousness didn't panic. It didn't sound alarms. It simply smoothed over the missing fraction of a second as if it never existed. Now imagine that gap wasn't a fraction of a second, but an entire hour, or 2, or 3. And imagine you're standing somewhere you don't remember walking to, with no memory of how you got there. This isn't science fiction. It's happened to ordinary people across the world. And what makes these experiences so unsettling isn't just the missing time itself. It's what it reveals about the fragility of our most basic assumption, that we're always present in our own lives. Today, we're not going to focus on what might have taken these people. Instead, we're going to explore something far more personal and perhaps more disturbing. What happens to the human mind when time simply disappears? How do people cope when their most reliable witness, their own memory, suddenly has nothing to say? And what can these experiences teach us about consciousness itself? Because whether you believe in alien encounters or not, the psychological reality of missing time is undeniable, documented, and deeply human. Before we can understand what happens when time goes missing, we need to understand how your brain normally keeps track of it. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is performing an incredible feat of temporal architecture. It's taking disconnected moments, thousands of them every second, and weaving them into a seamless narrative you experience as now. Neuroscientists call this the specious present, the psychological moment that feels like the current instant, but actually spans about 3 seconds of clock time. Your brain is constantly reaching back into the immediate past and forward into the anticipated future, binding them together into what you experience as the flowing present moment. This is why you can understand a sentence. The beginning is technically in the past by the time you reach the end, but your brain holds it all together as a single unit of meaning. Your sense of time isn't like a video recording, capturing everything in perfect sequential order. It's more like a storyteller, constantly reconstructing the narrative of your experience from fragments of sensory information, memory, and expectation. And like any storyteller, it occasionally gets details wrong, fills in blanks, and edits out boring parts. Most of the time, this system works flawlessly. You wake up, go through your day, and go to sleep with a relatively coherent sense of what happened and when. You might forget some details, sure, but the basic timeline holds together. Your morning came before your afternoon, lunch happened between breakfast and dinner. The story makes sense. But this system, elegant as it is, has vulnerabilities. It depends on continuous input from your senses, stable neural processing, and the ability to form new memories. Interrupt any of these, and the narrative can break down in disturbing ways. Consider what happens during a simple episode of highway hypnosis, something most drivers have experienced. You're driving along a familiar route, your mind wandering, maybe thinking about what you'll make for dinner or replaying a conversation from earlier. Suddenly, you blink back to awareness and realize you've traveled several miles with no memory of the drive. The exits have passed, the curves have been navigated, your car is still in the correct lane, but you have no conscious memory of those minutes. Your brain was on autopilot, handling the mechanical tasks of driving, while your conscious attention was elsewhere. When you snap back, there's a moment of disorientation, even alarm. Where did that time go? Why can't I remember it? Now imagine that feeling multiplied by a factor of 10 or 20. Imagine not 5 minutes of highway hypnosis, but 2 hours of complete absence. Imagine coming back to awareness not in your car on the same road, but somewhere else entirely, with the sun in a different position and your watch insisting that vast stretches of time have passed. This is what happens in missing time experiences, and it reveals something profound about how precarious our sense of temporal continuity really is. Psychologists who study these phenomena have identified several key elements that appear consistently across cases. First, there's the abruptness of the transition. Unlike falling asleep or daydreaming, where consciousness fades gradually, missing time events often involve a sharp discontinuity. One moment the person is fully present and aware, The next moment, they're somewhere else and the world has moved on without them. Second, there's the absence of dreamlike quality. People who experience missing time don't describe it as hazy or surreal. They describe it as nothing, a complete blank. They were there, then they were here, with no bridge between. Third, there's the physical evidence. Watches that have advanced, the sun or stars in different positions, sometimes even changes in location that would require walking or driving, yet the person has no memory of the journey. This combination of factors, the sharp transition, the complete absence of memory, and the external confirmation of past time, creates a profound psychological impact. It violates one of our most fundamental assumptions about reality, that we are continuous beings, always present in our own experience. When that assumption breaks down, it can shake a person's confidence in their own mind. If hours can disappear without a trace, what else might be unreliable? How can you trust your memory of anything if such enormous gaps can simply appear? One of the most striking aspects of missing time cases is the type of people they happen to. If these were fantasies or hoaxes, you might expect them to cluster among people with particular personality traits, perhaps those prone to imagination or seeking attention. But that's not what the research shows. Missing time experiences cut across demographics, happening to farmers and engineers, police officers and teachers, teenagers and retirees. The witnesses are often precisely the kind of people you'd least expect to fabricate or imagine such events. Take the Wyoming case from our research. Richard and Patricia Madsen were not the type to chase mysteries. Richard worked as a diesel mechanic, a job demanding precision and grounded thinking. Pat worked in a hardware store, known for her practical nature. They'd been married 12 years and had driven the same highway countless times. These were people whose lives ran on routine and reliability, yet they experienced something that violated everything they understood about time and memory. When they reported it to the sheriff, they were calm and coherent. They didn't speculate, they didn't add dramatic flourishes, they simply stated what they could verify. They lost 63 minutes, their watches agreed with their car clock, and they had no memory of that period. This pattern repeats across cases. The timber worker in Oregon who'd spent a decade in the woods, familiar with every kind of weather and wildlife, suddenly confronted with a gap in his day he couldn't explain. The schoolteacher in Ireland who'd walked the same lane with her dog hundreds of times, only to find herself on that path with stars visible when there should have been twilight. The trapper in Alberta who knew the northern forests better than most people know their own neighborhoods, standing beside his snowmobile in darkness when moments before it had been afternoon. These weren't people looking for excitement. They weren't seeking attention or trying to make names for themselves. Many of them were initially reluctant to report their experiences at all, worried about how it would sound, concerned about their reputations. This reluctance is itself psychologically significant. In the field of witness psychology, researchers distinguish between confabulators, people who unconsciously fill in memory gaps with false information, and suppressors, people who minimize or withhold information out of caution or embarrassment. Missing time witnesses typically show suppressor characteristics. They tend to understate rather than exaggerate. They avoid speculation. They stick to what they can verify. When interviewed separately, their accounts remain consistent, not just in the basic facts, but in the specific details and the careful, measured way they describe them. Consider the psychological state required to maintain such consistency over time. Human memory is notoriously malleable. Every time we recall an event, we reconstruct it, and each reconstruction can introduce subtle changes. False details can creep in, emphasis can shift, the story evolves. This is normal and well documented. Yet when investigators returned to missing time witnesses months or even years later, their accounts remained remarkably stable. The same details, the same sequence, the same careful avoidance of claims they couldn't support. This consistency under scrutiny is precisely what you'd expect from people describing genuine experiences, however anomalous, rather than constructing narratives. The emotional aftermath of these experiences also tells us something important. You might expect people who claim to have lost time to display certain psychological markers, perhaps dissociative tendencies or trauma symptoms. but that's rarely what investigators find. Most missing time witnesses show normal psychological profiles. They don't have histories of dissociation or fantasy proneness. They don't show signs of psychosis or severe anxiety disorders. What they do show is a specific, focused confusion about a particular event. They can tell you exactly where the gap in their memory begins and ends. They can describe their emotional state before and after. They know what should have happened and can articulate precisely why what actually happened makes no sense. This focused confusion is different from the global disorientation you'd see in someone experiencing a psychological crisis or the vague uncertainty of someone trying to remember something that never actually occurred. It's the response of a normally functioning mind confronted with data it can't reconcile. The person knows their memory is reliable because it works perfectly for everything else in their life. They remember getting up that morning. They remember breakfast. They remember the drive or the walk or the work they were doing. Their memory is clear and continuous right up until the moment it isn't. Then there's nothing. Then there's memory again, but the world has changed in ways that prove time passed. The investigators who documented these cases often comment on this peculiar quality. The witnesses aren't confused about whether something strange happened. They're confused about what happened during the missing period. It's a subtle but crucial distinction. They're not questioning their sanity or their grip on reality. They're questioning what could possibly cause such a specific, complete, and verifiable gap in their continuous experience of time. If missing time were purely psychological, purely a trick of memory or perception, we might expect it to leave only mental traces. But that's not what the evidence shows. These experiences often come with physical markers, objective evidence that something happened to the person's body during the missing hours, even if their mind has no record of it. Start with the simplest marker, the watches. In multiple cases, mechanical watches, timepieces that don't depend on batteries or circuits, stopped or showed elapsed time consistent with the gap in the witness's memory. These weren't digital devices that might malfunction due to electromagnetic interference. They were old-fashioned mechanical movements, springs and gears, devices that keep time through pure physics. When such a watch stops, it typically means it's been subjected to force, strong magnetism, or has simply wound down. But in missing time cases, the watches often resume normal function afterward with no sign of damage or interference. The timber worker in Oregon provides a clear example. His pocket watch stopped during his missing time period, showing the exact duration he couldn't account for. When examined later, the watch showed no mechanical defect, no magnetization, no damage. It simply resumed keeping time normally once the episode ended. The same pattern appeared in other cases. Watches that should have continued ticking forward somehow marked the boundaries of the missing time, as if whatever interrupted the witness's memory also interrupted the mechanical passage of seconds and minutes. Then there are the location changes. This might be the most disturbing physical evidence because it proves that something happened to the person's body during the time they can't remember. They don't just lose time while standing still, they find themselves somewhere else, sometimes dozens or hundreds of meters from where they last remember being. Their clothes show signs of walking through terrain. Their boots have mud from areas they didn't consciously traverse. Their bodies are positioned in ways that suggest movement occurred, yet they have no memory of that movement. The French shepherd in Extremadura found himself facing the opposite direction on a road he knew intimately, with his flashlight meters away in the dirt. The miner in South Africa discovered himself on the opposite side of the road from where he'd stopped his bicycle, the bike lying on its side in the distance. The forestry officer in Greece stood further up a mountain slope, his location changed by enough distance to prove he'd walked, but with no memory of the walk. These aren't small discrepancies. These are changes that require physical movement, changes that would normally register in memory and conscious awareness. The body keeps its own records, and sometimes these contradict the blank in memory. The French shepherd's shirt was damp with evening dew, though the ground had been dry when he first encountered the glowing sphere. This suggests he'd been lying down or sitting in grass as the temperature dropped, something that takes time. The trapper in Alberta found his snowmobile running again, engine warm, though he'd shut it off before his memory gap. This suggests someone operated it during the missing hours. The fuel level was lower than it should have been, consistent with idling or slow movement. His body showed no signs of having slept or lost consciousness, yet his snowmobile told a story of activity during time he couldn't account for. Perhaps most intriguing are the cases involving multiple witnesses and machinery. When the timber worker's co-workers arrived at his location, they confirmed he'd been unreachable by radio during a specific window. The radio itself functioned normally before and after, but during the missing time, it was as if he simply didn't exist in that communication space. Later, examining his tractor loader, they found a fuel line clamp loosened, something that required manual adjustment, yet he had no memory of touching it. The machine had stalled during his absence, suggesting it ran out of fuel or lost pressure, mechanical events that should have required his attention and intervention. These physical markers create a bizarre situation for the witnesses. Their minds have no record of a significant period of time, but their bodies and the objects around them do. Their watches moved forward, their locations changed, fuel was consumed, clothing got damp. These are objective, measurable changes that can be verified by others and by instruments. They prove that something happened during the missing time, even if the person's conscious mind was somehow not present for it. From a neurological perspective, this raises fascinating questions. We know the brain is constantly forming memories, consolidating experiences into long-term storage. For a memory gap this complete to occur naturally, something would need to interrupt that consolidation process completely, not just for a few seconds, but for sustained periods. Brain injuries can cause this, severe trauma that disrupts the hippocampus and other memory-forming structures. So can certain seizures or extreme stress events. But missing time witnesses typically show no signs of head trauma, no seizure disorders, no history of conditions that would explain such profound amnesia. Medical examinations after the events reveal normal brain function, normal stress hormone levels, normal everything, except for this one inexplicable gap. The few cases where physiological testing was conducted soon after the events showed some intriguing patterns. Some witnesses reported feeling unusually tired, as if they'd been awake longer than they remembered being. This suggests their bodies underwent the biological processes of those missing hours, even if their minds didn't record them. Others noticed their eyes felt strained, as you might experience after staring at something bright for too long, even though they couldn't remember seeing anything particularly bright. These are subtle markers, easy to dismiss individually, but taken together, they suggest the body experienced something the mind couldn't encode into retrievable memory. To understand why missing time is so psychologically disturbing, we need to understand what memory actually is and how it can fail. Your memory isn't a video recorder playing back accurate footage of your past. It's a reconstructive process, more like a storyteller weaving together fragments from different sources. Each time you remember something, your brain reassembles that memory from scattered pieces stored throughout your neural networks. It pulls together sensory details, emotional tone, contextual information, and narrative structure, then presents you with what feels like a complete, accurate recollection. But here's the crucial part. That recollection is only as good as the pieces that were stored in the first place. And storage depends on attention, on conscious processing, on the brain deciding that something is worth encoding into long-term memory. Most of your daily experience never makes it into long-term storage at all. Your brain filters constantly, deciding what's important enough to remember and what can be discarded. This is why you probably can't recall what you had for lunch 2 Tuesdays ago unless something remarkable happened during that meal. The experience occurred, but it wasn't flagged as significant, so it wasn't fully encoded, and now it's irretrievable. Missing time experiences are different because they involve time periods where something clearly was significant. These aren't forgotten lunch breaks. These are stretches of time where the person was actively trying to understand what was happening, where unusual sensory experiences were occurring, where the person's attention would have been fully engaged. These are exactly the kind of experiences that should be vividly encoded into memory. The person wasn't drowsy or distracted. They were alert, sometimes alarmed, experiencing unusual phenomena that should have commanded their full attention. Yet, when they try to recall what happened next, there's nothing. Not a vague memory or a confusing sequence. absolute nothing. This is neurologically puzzling because it suggests that memory encoding was completely prevented during these periods, not partially disrupted, which would leave fragments and confusion, but totally blocked. The experience occurred, the person's eyes and ears were functioning, their brain was active, but somehow the transfer from immediate experience to stored memory never happened. It's as if someone turned off the recording function while leaving everything else running. Consider what this means for the witness. They know from physical evidence that time passed. They know they must have moved, must have been somewhere, must have done something during those hours, but they have zero access to any of that experience. It's not like trying to remember a dream and finding the details slip away. It's not like straining to recall something from years ago and finding only fragments. It's a complete, absolute absence where memory should be. They can remember the moment before, they can remember the moment after, but the middle is simply gone, as if their consciousness skipped ahead like a scratched CD. From a cognitive psychology perspective, this presents a specific type of challenge to the self. Your sense of being a continuous person, the same person from moment to moment and day to day, depends heavily on memory providing that continuity. When memory is intact, you can trace yourself backward through time, connecting today's you to yesterday's you to last year's you through an unbroken chain of recalled experiences. But when a gap appears in that chain, especially a large gap with physical evidence that you existed and acted during it, the sense of continuous self becomes strained. Missing time witnesses often describe a peculiar split in their sense of identity after the experience. They know intellectually that they were present during the missing hours. The evidence proves it. Their body moved, their watch ticked forward. Time passed for them just as it did for everyone else. But subjectively, experientially, they weren't there. Wherever consciousness goes when we're in deep dreamless sleep, that's where theirs went. Except they weren't asleep, and it happened while they were standing upright, sometimes in the middle of doing something. They have to live with the knowledge that they somehow existed without knowing they existed, that hours of their life occurred that they will never be able to recall or understand. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension between conflicting pieces of information. On one hand, they trust their memories generally. Their memory works fine for everything else. They can recall their childhood, their work, their relationships, the earlier part of the very day when time went missing. Their memory is reliable. On the other hand, they have incontrovertible evidence that their memory failed completely for a specific period. The gap is there. It's real. It happened to them. Both things can't be fully true, yet both are supported by evidence. This tension never fully resolves. The witnesses learn to live with it, but it remains a source of profound unease, a crack in the foundation of their sense of self that never quite heals. What makes this even more challenging is the impossibility of filling the gap through normal means. Usually, when we can't remember something, we can reconstruct at least a partial account by asking others who were there, or by looking at photographs, or by reasoning backward from what we know came after. But missing time experiences often occur in isolation. There were no other witnesses to most of what happened during those hours. There are no photographs or recordings, and reasoning backward doesn't help because the person has no idea what they should be reasoning toward. They can't even form hypotheses about what might have filled the gap because they have no framework for understanding what could cause such a complete memory blackout in an otherwise healthy, alert person.
What happens to people after they experience missing time? How do they go on with their lives knowing that hours vanished from their existence? The answer varies, but certain patterns emerge across cases. Most witnesses don't become obsessed with finding explanations. They don't quit their jobs to pursue UFO research or spend years trying to recover the lost memories. Instead, they do something very human. They adapt. They incorporate the inexplicable event into their life story and move forward, carrying the mystery with them like a strange souvenir from a place they can't quite remember visiting. Many describe a shift in perspective, not toward belief in any particular explanation, but toward humility about what's possible. When you've experienced something that shouldn't be possible according to everything you understand about consciousness and time, it opens a crack in your certainty about reality. not wide enough to fall through, but wide enough to let in doubt. Witnesses often become more comfortable with ambiguity, more willing to accept that some questions might not have answers, at least not answers available to them. There's also a curious resilience in these accounts. Despite the profound strangeness of losing time, despite the violation of their sense of continuous self, most witnesses don't appear traumatized in the clinical sense. They're disturbed, certainly, confused, sometimes frightened, especially immediately after the event, but they don't typically develop the kind of lasting psychological damage you'd see from truly traumatic experiences. Perhaps this is because nothing bad happened to them during the missing time, at least nothing they can remember. They weren't hurt, they weren't changed in any obvious way. Time was simply taken, and then they were returned to their lives, largely unchanged except for the knowledge that something impossible had occurred.
The cases we've explored today represent a genuine mystery, not because of what might have taken these people, but because of what their experiences reveal about consciousness itself. We assume we're always present in our own lives, that our awareness tracks continuously from waking to sleeping and back again. But missing time experiences show us that continuity can be broken, that we can exist without experiencing that existence, that hours of our life can pass without leaving any trace in memory. Whether the cause is extraordinary technology, unusual natural phenomena, or something else entirely, the psychological reality of these experiences remains undeniable. People have lost time. Their watches prove it, their bodies prove it, the changed position of the sun and stars prove it, and they have to live with that proof while possessing no explanation for it. If there's a lesson in these accounts, it's this: consciousness is far stranger and more fragile than we typically acknowledge. The seamless flow of experience we take for granted is actually an incredible achievement of our brains, happening moment by moment, and it can be interrupted in ways we don't fully understand. Missing time witnesses aren't crazy. They're not lying. They're normal people who experienced something that shouldn't be possible and came back to tell us about it as honestly and carefully as they could. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of all. If it can happen to them, people rooted in routine and normality, what's to say it couldn't happen to any of us? What's to say it hasn't already happened and we simply have no way of knowing? The next time you blink, pay attention to that fraction of a second when your brain fills in the gap. Remember that your sense of continuous time is a construction, a story your mind tells you to make sense of the constant flood of disconnected moments. And remember that sometimes, for reasons we can't fully explain, that story has chapters missing. Hours that passed but left no trace. Time that existed for the world, but not for the person living through it. The mystery isn't just what happened to these people during their missing time, it's what their experiences reveal about the strangeness of time itself and the fragility of our sense that we're always, continuously, undeniably here.